Please welcome Som Singh.
Thank you very much for inviting me to come tonight, and it's a real pleasure to be here. It's a great room. Look, there's a few things I want to say. First is, this is sponsored by an organization that I am extremely passionate about, Junior Achievement, and I know many of you in the room are associated or part of Junior Achievement, and the story that we just heard around that business just shows you why this is such an amazing organization. Look at the quality of talent, the quality of ideas that this type of organization creates and curates. And so to the group that just presented, I will tell you that you are better than I am, smarter than I ever was at your age. So congratulations and kudos, and everyone in the room should be happy and proud. This is the kind of talent that young people are driving towards, and I think it's awesome. So I'm not your traditional crypto asset type of person, and so I'm not the person that would come up here and talk about why you should be buying Bitcoin and trading Litecoin and doing all these other things. I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a different angle. I'm going to come at it from the angle of an entrepreneur who is in a traditional business and is trying to think about the future of our state of society and infrastructure of business. And I'm going to give you some anecdotal view and some thinking that we all need to sort of consider. So first and foremost, look, I've built several businesses. I started a company, called Claymore. I built it up in the traditional investment space, really powerful. Thought about the innovations that could happen in the technology of financial product being exchange traded funds, and really helped drive that business, over a number of years. And it's a surprise of even myself. We built a really fantastic organization. Sold that to BlackRock in 2012 and stepped away and thought a little bit about where we were at that point in the space of financial services and industry. And I decided to build and really move forward on two new businesses. The first was my company called Purpose Investments, which I'm running today, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things there. And the second is a company called Wealthsimple, which is a business that I co-founded with my partner, Mike Katchen. And the reason we did this was, again, from the perspective of what I saw as challenges that our industry was facing from a technology perspective in helping and supporting the infrastructure of the future of how a business should be run. And over the last number of years, as I've been building these businesses, I keep telling myself, well, that's great, but in such a window of, it's been 12 years since I started Claymore. In such a window, there's been just an amazing sense of transformation in technology, unit economics, modeling of how business and transactions move. And I kept saying to myself, well, what's going to happen to my business in the future? And who's going to build the technology that's going to make my business irrelevant? And so I've been pushing my team and my partners to keep thinking, who's going to build what I call ETF 3.0? And in that journey, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I started to read a lot more about the blockchain and the technology behind the blockchain. And I started to say to myself, look, as an industry player, I need to know what's happening here. And so I made an investment in a company called Citizen Hex, which is a really awesome company building, sort of trading and structure around the whole Ethereum network and the blockchain. And I did that so I could give myself and my partners a seat at the table. And this was really important. The seat at the table just said, I want to just learn. Curiosity is really important. Over the last 12 months since we've done that, I've learned that everybody needs a seat at this table. And the reality is that what's happening at the grassroots here is really fascinating. But I would just tell you that I believe it's still at the grassroots. It is still so early. And so much is still to be determined and how much is going to change. But the reason that we did this and why we've been building the businesses the way we've been thinking about it is because of this principle. Is that I believe that over the next 10 years, the industry is going to look different than it does today. Much different. And I've seen change happen, and I'm a big believer that change happens in tectonic shifts, but they happen in pace, depending on the industry and the pressures around regulation and incumbents and how much early adoption happens. Change happens, but it happens at different paces. The reality is blockchain has unbelievable power. And I think there was a comment about where it started from. It started from a simple principle of the financial crisis. And a simple principle of a white paper that talks about this idea of decentralizing power. Simple as that. And if you think about globalization that's been happening for the last 30 years, so much of globalization is about this idea of trying to decentralize power. What the blockchain has done and is doing is effectively doing that at a pace and scale that is even grander than you can even imagine. And it's really relevant. So the original Bitcoin white paper had a very specific focus, really, really cool focus, but it was all about this idea of let's not let the man get in the way of me and you transacting. And this is really cool. And what happened between sort of 2009 and the next number of years was this sort of cultivation of this idea. And of course what happened was Bitcoin was built off of that currency principle of transaction. But what started to kind of come to bear was this idea of, wait a minute, well that's cool, the currency, but what's this thing underneath this kind of currency, this blockchain concept? And that actually led to much grander vision than the original white paper for Bitcoin. And that led to things like the Ethereum platform really coming out with a bigger view of blockchain as being the world computer. And today, we are now at the stage where the vision of what this is about this concept of building the new infrastructure, the new world computer, the new internet, as some people will call it. And that, to me, is really quite fascinating. If you go back to the 1960s and you go back to the 70s and 80s when the internet was really being, built and created from a vision perspective, to when it started to get into the minds of people as really as technology that could be adopted in the sort of 90s, to actually acceleration of that adoption and commercialization of that adoption in the late 90s into the early 2000s, cultivated by a hype that funded a significant amount of the laying of the infrastructure that then led to the last 18 years of acceleration of technology. Well, what blockchain is doing today is that, at its earliest stage, with a very compressed timetable. And to me, that's awesome. So what does it mean? Well, when we can think back about this idea of decentralization, it is now giving a view of the world with this idea of who owns what. The last 30 years, what that internet structure did was it created this idea of monopolies. It created a monopolistic type of approach to ownership. So the model of the protocol, which we all know is the HTTP layer of the TCP/IP layer of the internet, the protocol was built around this vision and the infrastructure. And then the businesses that layered on top of that, the applications, the infrastructure, the businesses that were built on top of that were the ones who monetized and built the monopolies. And today, the way that we talk to our friends is structured with a monopoly. The way you search for information is structured with a monopoly. The way we interact on data is structured with monopolies. The way we watch TV is structured with monopolies. And the reality is, those are really awesome technologies, but they totally got it wrong in this idea that who should own what. And in fact, the vision of the blockchain takes this and says, much of those monopolies are in fact, should be public utilities. And when you think about it from this angle, that's really cool. Just like a public park, well, why is it that my ability to search for data should be owned by somebody else? Why shouldn't I search for data or search for something and that be public? Why should that be owned by somebody? Why should all that data go to somebody else? Why shouldn't that be owned by me? Or by each of us and the data that I'm using to search for? The idea of me talking to you and me and others, my friends, shouldn't that be a communication between me and my friends, and we should own that, not somebody else? Well, that's ultimately what the blockchain is now conceptualizing. And that is really, really fascinating when you think of it. But it goes much further than that. It goes to the idea of who owns the pipes between which I can transact a dollar from me to you? Or who owns the pipes for where and how I house my financial information? Or who owns the pipes of how a transaction on the stock exchange occurs and settles? Well, today, all of those pipes are owned by monopolies, by businesses, by companies that are creating enterprise value for themselves. What the blockchain says is, no, those are infrastructure assets that should be owned by the public, by you individually. If you are transacting, you should own that. Now, if you can conceptualize this in your head, this is really fascinating again, because it means that under the blockchain technology, as an infrastructure, then the future state of business and the future state of society is truly restructured. Who owns what and where the value will create to or go to is going to restructure. And so from a business perspective, from an entrepreneur's perspective, we need to be thinking. You know, what's the future bank going to look like? It's not going to look like the bank that we see today. It's not going to be an ivory tower that, has a big logo at the top of it. It's going to be restructured such that it's distributed much more in the hands of the people. And what will the bank then do is there will be areas where they can create enterprise value for themselves. What will Facebook look like in the future? Well, likely it will look like you owning your own data for how you interact, and then you decide who you want to interact with. And then, what Facebook will have to figure out is, how do I get in the middle of that relationship to create a value-added service to you? And that's a very different enterprise value than the $700 billion company that's currently traded on the stock exchange. So, and Google. Google, as we all know, 90% of its business is in the idea of monetizing your search decisions. And so, what will the future Google look like in the blockchain? In the event that you want to search free and open information that is created by everyone in this room and everyone around the world, how will Google monetize its enterprise value to allow themselves to circumvent that if they don't have access to the data decision that you're having on your search? So these are really powerful concepts, and they absolutely flip on their head the way society is migrating and has been migrating for the last 30, 40 years. Now, on the same vein, what's really cool about this is that we are at the earliest stage of this thinking. The enterprise values I just talked about, or the businesses that will be value-added, the concepts that will sit on top of the protocol in the future have not yet been researched or developed. There hasn't been. I see it all the time in our industry. There's all these companies trying to go public with mining practices. We have crypto trading practices, and this is cool, they're not trying to go public, but crypto trading practices that are trying to go public and try to build on the hype. And that happens. It happened in the late 90s, where we had all the companies that, were just silly ideas that kind of came to the way that they actually, tried to build value. And of course, many of those went away, but under the sort of dust came up the real businesses that could build something. But we're such at an early stage. The businesses of the future have not yet been developed. And we, today, as individuals in this room, need to cut through the noise that is sitting in front of us. The noise is that you should just go out and buy currencies. Well, it's not currencies, it's technology. And the future is, what is the businesses going to look like that I should be a part of? What should I start? As entrepreneurs, what should you be the players to basically go and create the research and go create the enterprise value? What should you be investing into? How should your investment portfolio look in the future? All of these questions are going to be the things that are going to come out over the next couple of years. But I will say that it's not going to take 40 years or 30 years for this to get figured out. The pace of change of technology happens much faster over time, and today my view is that in the next 2 to 3 years we're going to start to see the first layer of enterprise start to play itself into society. And those layers are going to start to show themselves as the future state of business. Then the next layers and the next layers thereafter. Now, for the next 7 to 10 years, I believe our industries, as I said earlier, are going to look absolutely different. So as businesses, as leaders of companies today, as entrepreneurs, we need to be thinking about this. We need to be thinking about today, not 5 years from now. Now, I was quoted on Monday in the paper as saying that the ETF industry was going to go obsolete. And that's not what I said. It was misrepresented, misinterpreted. But what I did say is, it's up to me to figure out how to change myself so that if it goes obsolete, that I'm going to be one step ahead of it. If the watchmakers today are thinking that they're not going to become obsolete, then they've got their blinders on. The reality is that you can either have your blinders on, or you can go figure out what's the future thing that's going to go on people's wrists, or how am I going to monetize time, or this principle. And that's what we all need to be thinking about. Every business, every individual, every entrepreneur, every leader today has to be thinking this way. Because the infrastructure monetization is changing. There are going to be massive risks, and we've got lots of players who don't want to see change. As I said earlier, monopolies love status quo. But the reality is the beautiful thing is this is happening at a level that is well beyond any one individual monopoly. This is what's really cool. We've had, the papers in the last couple of years much more talk for the first time about the centralization of power into some of the big technology companies like Amazon and Google and Facebook and Netflix. This is an Apple, but this is really cool. For the first time we're actually seeing that. But that's actually leading people to more than ever realize the need for decentralization of that power. But I was going to say the other thing that's really important is regulation. So you hear every day about the regulators spending a ton of time thinking about this space, wondering, is this real or not? And of course, they're cautious and saying, some people say it's a bubble, some people say it's a fraud, some people say this is not real, some people say, we should be paying a little bit of attention. The reality is that all they are doing is saying, we want this to slow down because it's way ahead of us. And we don't have control. And guess what? It's reality. The regulators have centralized power as well. And what's going to change here is that my view is this is going to get very messy. And why I say it's going to get messy is because unfortunately I think the regulators are going to struggle. Because what's happened, and I'll give you the best industry example is, but it's any industry, but regulation is a fragmented thing. It's jurisdictional. And so Canada has jurisdiction over certain regulation, US has jurisdiction over its regulation, and all around the world. And unfortunately, if we don't have one centralized regulation globally, we can never have control over what's ultimately changing right now. Because if you have jurisdictional regulation with a decentralized global technology, well, what happens is people will just fluidly go to where the regulator is willing to work with them. And so if Canada becomes a jurisdiction that gets very hands-on and changes, restrictive, well, people will move to Switzerland, or they'll go to Singapore, and all around the world. And the best example of this is, people talk about baseball and how are we going to ever rein in the salaries of baseball players. Well, the reality is the only way you can ever do it is through a organized salary cap. But if you try to get all 29, or I don't know how many baseball teams there are, 30 teams, if 29 agree on one principle and one person doesn't, it all falls apart. So unless you have one regulated structure that everyone in the world agrees to, it never works. So this is going to become a mess. And I believe wholeheartedly that it's going to play out in the next 3 to 5 years quite meaningful. Now, for you guys and for all of us, depending on your vantage point, how should you be thinking about this? I think there's going to be fascinating opportunities. But you have to be really careful. Because of the fact that there's an unregulated space, you have to, again, decentralization of regulation means you're regulating yourself. And so what does that mean? You can't get caught into the fear of missing out. You can't get caught up into the hype. You can't get caught up into the idea that, like, you know what, oh, this is okay, that they told me something, so I should trust it. You've got to do that homework. It's actually decentralizing all of that work. So, you know, frauds are going to become more prevalent. We're seeing it every day. There's going to be real risk here. And it's now up to you, if you want to be a part of this, to figure it out. My perspective is, it's an extremely exciting space. Nothing that we see today necessarily is going to be the future state. I personally have invested and believe in Ethereum because I believe it's the protocol that has the most likely scenario of winning, highest probability. It's an asymmetric bet on that upside. But my view is that, you know, we don't know. Just like every early stage technology, there's going to be lots of change. And it's what I believe it is because that's where the developers are. That's where the mind share is. That's where the innovation is. And you always migrate to where the developers and the innovation is. But from all of your perspectives, the real opportunity is not in trading ICOs or buying, chasing all this stuff. The idea is to find the thing you believe in the most and then find a way to be a part of it. Whether that is with your own capital or whether it is with your own careers or what it is, whatever you're looking at doing. That's the real opportunity. And there's going to be amazing opportunities for individuals to change the state of things and be a part of that change of state of things. So, what I would tell you is that this is fun. Every single young person in this room, which is the vast majority of everyone in this room, you should be truly excited. Because for the first time, you get a shot at doing anything you want. And that's the way I think every single day. And that's where you should be going at this as well. Okay? This technology is going to change things, and it's going to change it for you and your opportunity set too. Okay? Thank you. I think I'm going to answer any questions from the audience if you want to ask any. Love to.
So we do have 2 mics which will be circling around. If you could just raise your hand if you do have a question. Yes, press the button.
Okay, so thank you so much. I'm just going to kick it off with one question. I know we have a very youthful room, and a lot of individuals here are very passionate about the technology. They understand it, some may not. But my question to you is, within our age of technology, and as we're entering into the age of decentralization, what things can we as young professionals be doing to cultivate our skills for our careers, as well as our skills in terms of our lives in general?
Well, I mean, look, I don't think it's just about decentralization. I think in general, the skill sets that you have are consistent, you know, in any walk of life. And so here's what I think makes great individuals. One is I think you're curious. Curiosity is the most amazing characteristic you will ever have in your life. 2 is that you have you got to have some intelligence, and whether that's in whatever field you're in, I can tell you, intelligence doesn't need to be the top of the class. It just needs to be, you just need to be willing to think, and you need to be able to think. I was not the smartest person in my class, I can tell you that for certain, and I'd say 90% to 100% of you guys in this room are smarter than I am. The 3rd is you got to have lots of willingness to work hard, and the effort that you put in is always going to be the driving force of how much luck you get. Simple as that. You know, you hear it, it's a cliche, you hear it consistently from sports athletes, you hear it from business individuals. It's the most amazing thing. The luck is created by effort, and so, you know, it's a higher probability of success. And, you know, I think if you combine those things, those are really important. Now, in today's world, you guys are already building a lot of the skill sets. You know, you're building the skill sets around technology. You know, we talk about the STEMs all the time. I think STEMs are the most important elements, you know, that we should all be focusing on. That's the future state of much of society. And so technology is going to be really important, and you know, I think building those grassroots informations. You know, it's funny. I was out today with one of my partners, and you know, we all probably in this room there's probably a high correlation to the group of people in this room that are thinking about AI as well as they are thinking about blockchain. And the reality is, it's for good reason. Well, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning and all these things are really, really important and powerful concepts today. And the problem we have right now is there is a massive gaping hole of underinvestment into talent, you know, and of course a huge amount of demand. So what does that do? Is it distorts price. We've got a bubble in talent right now, unfortunately. But that will get fixed because over the next couple of years, we're going to see the talent start to really drive as people move there. So I think having those skill sets, having the ability to know where the future state is really important. The last thing I'm going to say is that when you are 20, 17, 25, you're building a career for your sweet spot. And your sweet spot as an individual is generally going to be between 35 to 45. That's when you're going to hit it. That's when you've got a great mixture of network, wisdom, and still have the energy to drive. So you've got to be thinking about what's the future state going to look like in 15, 20 years, not next year. So when you think about the career choices, when you think about the businesses, when you think about your educational places, think about investing in where do I want to be hitting my stride in 15 years. That's the industry I want to be focused on with this type of characteristic or skill sets I want.
Thank you so much. All right, we have one question over here, so just start with your name and then go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Shayan. So Salam, thanks first off for the keynote, quite insightful. My question is relative to, you mentioned STEM, and something that's been sort of worrying me, I suppose, is this constant talk about moving towards STEM and getting everyone in towards STEM and getting them all in technology. As needed as that is, what about leaving behind disciplines that already are sort of overlooked, such as liberal arts and humanities, that really, I think, the problem is the technology we have today, the reason that regulators are like, wait, slow down, are because as a culture, we haven't advanced, our technology has advanced farther than we have. And so we're struggling with what we're dealing with today. And then this is showing up, and this is even faster than what we're currently dealing with, and still as people, now we're even farther behind. So what is your insight on, like, sure, STEM is important, but then what about the rest of it, and how do you balance that inequality?
So I think it's a great question, and let me be really honest with you. Is STEM, or the concept of learning technology, engineering, medicine, these are foundational things. This is necessary in the future of whatever you're doing. I'm an engineer. I studied engineering. I didn't work as an engineer. I went immediately into investment banking, then I went into running asset management. Now I'm building technology platforms and investment management. The reality is that what you do with your skill sets are really important. You've got a foundational skill set. Then it's a question of what are you going to do there? Having a liberal arts and humanities and social studies and the principle of history, all that stuff is really powerful. And that gives you a vantage point that is beyond just, hey, I can code. So I would tell you that in the future state, you better know how to code, or you better know how to understand these elements of technology. But these are really all value-added skill sets to have in your life and skill sets. So your career may not be as a coder just because they were going into engineering or computer sciences, but you want to have that in whatever you're doing. Okay. So those are awesome skill sets. But if you go to society, if you go to the world today with just a humanities background, I think you'll struggle. It's funny, I get these emails, and I hope no one in the room is going to offend you. I get these emails today by kids who are in MBA classes. And I wonder, without any technology background, and I always say, what is the future of this person going to look like? Because they don't have the skill sets that you need to drive in the future. So build those business structures with technology. Build the social sciences with technology, and that's a very powerful combo.